The carpenter building our home told me my husband already had a white wife in the United States of America. The man was hammering a nail into the door frame of the house my husband said he was building for us when he stopped, looked at me and said, "Madam, I don't know if I should tell you this." And I remember thinking, what kind of sentence starts like that? What kind of man pauses in the middle of work he's being paid for, wipes sweat from his forehead, and decides that this is the moment? But he did not look like a man starting trouble. He looked like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally found someone to put it down in front of. I told him to say whatever he needed to say. He said, "Your husband has a wife in America, a white woman. They have been married for 4 years." I stood there in the shell of the house that was supposed to be my future and felt the walls that were not even finished, close in around me. If you think you know where this story goes, stay with me, because you do not. My name is Ifesinachi. I was born in Owerri, the third of 5 children, raised by a mother who believed that a woman's greatest achievement was a good marriage, and a father who believed the opposite, but was too quiet to say so out loud. I grew up in between those two beliefs, never fully settled in either. I was a secondary school teacher, literature and English at a private school in Owerri, a woman who loved books and argued about ideas, and had, by the time I was 28, mostly accepted that the kind of man I wanted might not exist in the places I was looking. Then I met Tobena. He came back from America for his cousin's wedding. He sat at the high table in a blue agbada that fit him like it had been stitched directly onto his skin. And when he laughed, it was the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room turn and look. We were introduced through mutual family friends the day after the wedding at a small gathering at his aunt's house in New Owerri. He was 34. He worked in logistics in Houston. He said he had been looking to come home, that America had given him everything except a reason to stay. I told him that was a rehearsed line. He laughed again and said, "You're right, but it's also true." We talked for 4 hours that day. When he left, he asked if he could call me. I said yes. For 6 months, we spoke every day. Long calls in the evenings when the time zones aligned. He was thoughtful in the way that long distance makes people thoughtful. He had time to think before he said things, and what he said was always considered, always specific, never lazy. He remembered details. He asked about my students by name. He sent me books, actual physical books, shipped from a Nigerian store in Houston, which arrived weeks after he mentioned them, with little handwritten notes tucked inside the covers. I fell in love carefully. I had seen enough in my family and community to know that the falling was the easy part. I watched for signs of things I did not want, dishonesty, temper, the kind of casual entitlement that men who live abroad sometimes bring back like luggage. I watched and I did not see those things. What I saw instead was a man who seemed genuinely good. He proposed on his second visit home, 8 months after we met. He did it simply. No elaborate staging, no crowd of family members watching, just the two of us at a small restaurant in Owerri with a ring he said his mother had helped him choose. He said, "Ifesinachi, I want to build something with you, a real life, something that lasts." I said, yes. Our families met. There were prayers and knocking ceremonies and joy, the particular kind of Nigerian joy that fills a compound and spills into the street. My mother was radiant. My father shook Tobena's hand for a long time and looked at him in the eyes and seemed satisfied with what he saw. We planned the wedding for 11 months later, which would give Tobena time to arrange his affairs in Houston and begin the process of coming home properly. The house was his idea. He said he wanted us to have our own space from the beginning, not to rent, not to start in anyone's family compound. He had land in a quiet estate on the edge of Owerri, land his late father had left him, and he wanted to build there. He engaged a contractor, a man named Ezenwachi, and construction began 6 months before the wedding. I was involved in the planning. I chose tiles and window styles and the color of the kitchen walls. I drove past that plot of land every week just to watch it become something. Every beam that went up felt like proof that this was real. Ezenwachi ran the site. He was a compact, serious man in his mid-40s, a master carpenter and builder from Olu who had been in the business for over 20 years. He did not talk much. He gave instructions to his boys in short, precise sentences. He checked measurements twice. He was, by every visible standard, exactly the kind of man you wanted building your house. He never spoke to me unnecessarily. He answered my questions about the work. He showed me progress reports. That was all. Until the Tuesday morning in March when he stopped nailing and said what he said. I want you to understand something about that moment. It was not dramatic the way moments are in films. There was no music, there was no slow turn. It was just a Tuesday. The sound of hammering, the smell of fresh cement, the sun already getting too hot at 9 in the morning. And then this quiet, serious man pausing in his work to tell me that the life I was building was already occupied. I asked him to repeat himself. He did. I asked him how he knew. And here is where the story starts to turn. Ezenwachi did not know because of rumor or gossip. He knew because his younger sister, Chioma, lived in Houston, Texas. She had lived there for 11 years working as a nurse in a hospital in the Harris Medical Center area. And 3 years ago, at a Nigerian community event in Houston, Chioma had met a man named Tobena Nwachukwu, a man in logistics, a man who was charming and laughed in a way that made everyone turn and look. A man who was at that point already married to a woman named Rebecca, a white American woman who she had married in a small civil ceremony 2 years earlier. Chioma had not known at first that he was married. She found out after several months of what she believed was a genuine relationship building between them when she went to his apartment unannounced and found photographs. Photographs of Tobena and Rebecca. Wedding photographs, casual photographs, photographs of a life that was already full. She left. She cut off contact. She told her family back home but decided not to publicize it further because she did not want the drama, did not want to be seen as the other woman in a story she had been deceived into, and Tobena was not her business anymore. Then Ezenwachi came home to take on this construction job. He recognized the name on the contract, Nwachukwu, Tobena. He called Chioma to ask if this was the same man. She confirmed it. She said he was engaged to a woman in Owerri. She said she did not know what to do. Ezenwachi, who was a man of few words but strong convictions, had been parrying this for 2 months. 2 months of driving to that site every morning, overseeing the building of a house for a man he knew was lying. Watching me come and go with excitement in my eyes about tile colors and window frames. 2 months. And then one morning, he could not carry it anymore. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Because the part coming up, the part where I find out that this story has even more layers than I thought, is the part that genuinely stopped me cold. Stay right here. I did not cry when Ezenwachi told me. I want to be clear about that. Something in me shut very tightly, the way a door shuts in a strong wind. Fast, hard, complete. I asked him for Chioma's number. He hesitated. Then he gave it to me. I did not call Tobena, not yet. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at nothing for 3 hours. My mother called during that time. I did not answer. My best friend, Ogom Sinachi, called. I did not answer. I sat with the information the way you sit with something burning, because you cannot put it down and you cannot hold it much longer. At 7 that evening, I called Chioma. She answered on the second ring. When I told her who I was, she went very quiet. Then she said, "I was wondering when you would call, or if you ever would." Her voice was calm but careful. The voice of a woman who had rehearsed a version of this conversation in her head many times and was still not entirely sure she was ready for the real one. We spoke for 2 hours. She told me everything. The community events that they met, the months of phone calls and dinners, the apartment, the photographs. She told me that Rebecca was not a casual relationship. She was a real marriage, legally registered in Harris County, with a joint lease on an apartment and shared bank accounts, and a life that was genuinely interlocked. She told me that after she left, she had heard through the Houston Nigerian community that Tobena had told Rebecca he was only visiting family in Nigeria on his trips back home. That the engagement, the knocking ceremony, the wedding plans, the house, Rebecca knew nothing about any of it. And then Chioma told me something that I had not expected. She told me she still had his emails. Not because she was vindictive. She had kept them because she had been hurt and afraid and unsure whether she would ever need to protect herself legally. She had never shown them to anyone, but she had them. Months of emails between her and Tobena, in which he wrote about his feelings, his plans, his life, and in which he mentioned several times that he was dealing with a complicated situation at home that he was working to resolve. He never told her the truth directly, but the emails made clear that he was living a life he was curating for multiple audiences. I asked Chioma if I could share the emails. She said yes. She said, "Do whatever you need to do, Ifesinachi. I am sorry this is happening to you." I still had not cried. I called Tobena the next morning. He was in Houston. He was due to fly back to Nigeria in 3 weeks, a month before the wedding. He picked up on the first ring, warm and immediate, the way he always was. He asked how the site visit went. He said he had been thinking about the color of the gate. I said, "Tobena, who is Rebecca?" The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. In those 4 seconds, the entire Tobena I had known, the man in the blue agbada, the man with the handwritten notes in books, the man my father shook hands with, disappeared. And what was left was just silence. Then he said, "Where did you hear that name?" Not, "I don't know anyone named Rebecca." Not, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Where did you hear that name?" Which is the sentence of a man who knows exactly what you are talking about and is trying to buy time to decide how much to deny. I told him about Ezenwachi. I told him about Chioma. I told him about the emails. Another silence. Longer this time. Then, and I will never forget this for as long as I live, he said, "It is not what you think. Rebecca and I are separated. We have been separated for over a year. I was going to tell you after the wedding, once the divorce was finalized. I did not want to stress you with my problems." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. He was going to tell me after the wedding. After the wedding. I asked him if he was still legally married to Rebecca. He said, "Technically, yes, but..." I ended the call. I sat in my flat in Owerri, and for the first time since Tuesday morning, I cried. Not the quiet kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than hot, from the death of a version of your future you had spent 11 months building in your imagination. Every conversation, every book with a handwritten note, every drive past that construction site, every tile I had chosen with my own hands, it all came crashing down in one room on one afternoon in a way that made me feel like I was watching something collapse that I had no way to catch. My friend Ogomsinache came over that evening. I told her everything. She held my hand and said nothing for a long time. And then she said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should you do, not what will people say. What do you want to do? And that question, that specific question is what saved me. Because what I wanted was not what everyone expected me to want. I did not want to call off the wedding quietly and disappear into the story of a woman who was deceived and survived it. I did not want to fight Tobena in a way that left me looking like a scorned woman whose feelings were the main event. What I wanted was the truth, the full truth, laid out in a way that could not be reburied. I engaged a lawyer, a woman named Mrs. Okoye, who practiced family law in Owerri and had a reputation for being exact and fearless. I gave her the emails Chioma had forwarded to me. I gave her Chioma's contact information. I asked her to establish, formally and legally, whether Tobena Nwachukwu was currently married to a foreign national in the United States and whether any marriage conducted in Nigeria between this man and a Nigerian woman would be legally valid given his existing undissolved marital status. Mrs. Okoye came back in 10 days with a clear answer. Yes, Tobena was legally married to Rebecca Ann Holloway in Harris County, Texas. The marriage had not been dissolved. There was no pending divorce filing in any Texas court, which meant that any marriage ceremony between Tobena and I would not only be conducted on a foundation of deception, it would be legally invalid under Nigerian law, which does not recognize a marriage contracted while one party has a subsisting foreign marriage. He had not just lied to me. He had been planning to trick me into a wedding that would have given me the emotional reality of a wife with none of the legal protection. Mrs. Okoye asked me how I wanted to proceed. I told her I needed one more piece of information first. I needed to know whether Rebecca knew, whether this woman in Houston was a victim in her own right, or whether she was a knowing participant in some arrangement I did not fully understand. That was the part I had been afraid to find out. Chioma made the introduction. Through a mutual contact in the Houston Nigerian community, a message was passed to Rebecca, a careful, non-threatening message explaining that there was a woman in Nigeria who needed to speak to her about her husband. Rebecca's response came back in 48 hours. She agreed to a video call. I want you to understand that sitting down in front of a laptop to speak with the white American wife of the man who was supposed to marry you in 3 weeks is not something any part of your life prepares you for. There's no script for it. There's no precedent in your mother's advice or your church's sermons or any book you have ever read. You just sit down and the screen opens and there she is. Rebecca was 31, blonde hair pulled back. She looked tired, the specific kind of tired that is not about sleep. When she saw me, she went still. And then she said, "You're the one he's been going back to Nigeria for." Not a question, a sentence that told me she had already known something. She had not known about the engagement. She had not known about the wedding or the house or the knocking ceremony. But she had known that something in her marriage had been wrong for over a year. She had known that Tobena's trips to Nigeria were more frequent than family visits warranted. She had confronted him twice. Both times he had deflected with charm, with explanations, with the specific fluency of a man practiced at redirecting uncomfortable conversations. She had not left because she had not had enough certainty to act on what she felt. Now she had certainty. Rebecca and I spoke for 90 minutes. By the end of it, we were not friends. That would be too simple a word for what happens between two women who had discovered they have been sharing a man without knowing it. But we were something. We were two people who had been fed the same lie from different sides of the same mouth and who had, separately, chosen to face it instead of hiding from it. Rebecca filed for divorce in Harris County 2 weeks later. I cancelled the wedding. Not quietly. That matters. I did not send a small message to family members asking them to cancel their travel arrangements and move on. I asked Mrs. Okoye to draft a formal notice to both families explaining the grounds of the cancellation, including Tobena's existing marital status. I asked that the notice be delivered before any further preparations were made. I did not name Rebecca cruelly. I did not turn this into an attack on a woman who had also been wronged. But I did not protect Tobena either. The fallout was loud. Tobena's family, some of them, called to threaten, to beg, to bargain. His mother called my mother weeping and said she had not known, that she was as blindsided as anyone. I believed her. There was genuine shock in her voice. But I also knew that whether she had known or not did not change anything. Her son had done what he had done. My mother was devastated, but not in the way I had feared. She did not blame me. She did not say I should have handled it quietly. She said, "You are your father's daughter," which from a woman who had spent 30 years being the opposite of my father was the most remarkable thing she had ever said. My father said nothing. He came to my flat, sat across from me, and placed his hand on mine for a long time. That was enough. Tobena never gave me a real apology. He sent messages, long messages full of explanations and context and the specific grammar of a man who has been caught and is trying to reframe the catching as a misunderstanding. I read the first one. I did not read the others. The house on the estate, the one with the tiles I had chosen, and the windows I had argued about, and the kitchen walls that were being painted the color I had picked. That house belonged to him. It was his land, his contract, his name. I had no legal claim to it, and I did not want one. But Ezenwachi, quiet, serious, precise Ezenwachi from Olu, the man who had been hammering a nail into a door frame on a Tuesday morning and stopped. Ezenwachi completed the house. He told me later that he had considered quitting the job, that he had gone back and forth about whether he could in good conscience finish a project for a man like Tobena. But he had workers depending on their pay. He had commitments. He finished the house. And then he submitted his final bill, collected his payment, and never worked with Tobena again. He told me this when I went to thank him 3 months after the cancellation. I had not seen him since that morning at the site. I tracked down his number through a family contact and called him, and he agreed to meet at a small restaurant in Owerri. When I sat across him, I said, "You did not have to tell me. You had a contract. You could have stayed quiet." He shrugged in the way of a man who has thought carefully about something and resolved it. He said, "I have daughters, 3 of them. I thought about what I would want if somebody knew something about the man my daughter was building a house with and said nothing." That was all he said. I am 31 now. I still teach literature and English at the same school in Owerri. I still love books. I still argue about ideas. I did not leave Nigeria, did not collapse into bitterness, did not become a cautionary tale that other women were asked to learn from in hushed voices. I became, if anything, more specific about what I want, more honest about what I will not accept, and more grateful for the people who, when faced with a choice between silence and truth, choose the harder thing. I still think about Rebecca sometimes. I heard through Chioma that the divorce was finalized, that she had moved to a different city, started over. I hope she is well. I hope she found something that did not have a lie buried in its foundation. I hope Tobena, wherever he is, understands what he lost. Not just me, not just Rebecca, but the version of himself that those 2 women believed in. That version is gone. You cannot deceive your way back to something you only ever had because someone trusted you. There is an Igbo saying my father used to quote when I was growing up. Ihe onye matara, ya taya. What a person has done, let them eat it. Not revenge, not punishment, just consequence. The natural weight of a thing coming to rest on the person who set it in motion. Tobena is eating it. And I am building something else, slower this time, more carefully, with eyes open at every stage of the foundation. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that truth has a way of finding its footing no matter how many walls are built around it, then share it. Pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. And if you are not subscribed to this channel, do it now, not because of algorithms or numbers, because the next story might be the one that changes something for you. The stories we carry matter. The ones we tell ourselves and the ones we finally let someone else tell us. Stay with us. There is always more to tell.